So, we're here to talk about courageous conversations. There's so many conversations going on in the world. We're very busy, right? We're talking a lot these days. We're texting a lot, we're emailing a lot, we're arguing a lot. But there aren't too many courageous conversations. And we certainly have come to the place where we realize how important it is, not just for our own personal happiness, to learn what does it actually mean to have a courageous conversation, but actually for the world at large. I'm so frightened of having a courageous conversation, we default to something else instead, and we're in a lot of trouble, profound trouble. So we're here tonight to really, hopefully if we have some expertise, I think it is around this whole idea of what does it mean, as Nazarene said in her intro, about learning how to become emotionally responsible human beings. That's not just a sort of a concept or an idea for us. It is a mission. And what we teach in our workshops and our counselor training program, as well as in our own personal relationship. Gone through a lot to learn what does this actually mean to have a courageous conversation. Now, I want to tell you a little story. We're going to tell you a few little vignettes of situations we've run into over the years, where we initially would have bounced off having a courageous conversation and would do something else instead. I want to tell you about a situation I was in many years ago, very early on in my career, when I was about 23 years old. Yeah, it was in the last century, not the one before it. I'm not that old. And I was working at this place called the Maples, which was a treatment center for, it was a 6-month treatment center for some of the most disturbed, as we used the word in those days in the 70s, teenagers in the province. And it was sort of built on a mental health institution complex idea where you had a boys' wing and a girls' wing, and you had a station in the middle where we met as a staff. And when we met, there would be about, 16 to 18 teenagers in a cottage. And there'd be about 5 or 6 staff on at a time for a day shift, an evening shift, and there'd be a couple of night custodians that would come in. But on the day shift, you'd have a person that was a shift head and 5 or 6 people that would be working under this person. I was a shift head on a shift, and we'd be working with somebody for, a week, 5 or 6 days a week or something like that. Then you'd mix up and work with other people. And at the end of the day shift, follow me on this, please. At the end of the day shift, the shift head would tell the evening shift about what happened on the day shift, right? And I'm the shift head, so I'm going to represent what happened here to pass on the shift. And one day I was sitting there working with my team, and I'm talking to the evening staff. And there was one person sitting in front of me, and I'm looking at her as if she's coming on shift. And I'm explaining, I keep on looking at her. She says, "Duane, why are you telling me? I was here with you all day." Oh, really? Oh, I'm so sorry. You know what? I was just so incredibly apologetic. How could I do something like that? I felt bad, just thrashing myself. And you're not going to believe it. The next day, the same thing happened. I can't believe that either. Same thing happened. And I just apologized vehemently. I felt so anxious about this situation. Just stirred up so much in me, and all I wanted to do is figure it out, fix it, make her feel okay, apologize, which I tried to do, but I was not actually having a courageous conversation. I was not having a courageous conversation. Should I tell them the end of this now, or should we wait till later?
No, you got to tell it.
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
So at the end of this, and everybody's just feeling bad for me too, and the whole situation, and Duane, you idiot, why did you do that? And I just was so busy trying to figure out how I will crucify myself now. Not whether I would, but how am I going to crucify myself? And instead, I had this moment of silence. I just started, because she said, how could you not see me? How could you not see me? There was this pregnant silence. And I finally looked up, and I looked at her. And I said, I really want to work this out with you. I don't know why I didn't see you. That was a courageous conversation started. I don't know why I didn't see you. There may be more to the answer to that question than just I'm a horrible person. There may be something in our relationship, in the way we relate to each other or operate or posture with each other, where we're both contributing to this disconnect. Because then I just said that, and I don't know why. And I was a friendly, it wasn't, I don't know why I don't see you. No, it was, I really want to work this out. I don't know why, and I want to look at that. And I let it sit again. And then tears started coming down her eyes. She said, that's the story of my life. I make sure nobody ever sees me. I've been hiding for the last 2 days. And she started talking about herself, about how come that happened. And I started talking about myself, about how I missed her. And we started having a very, very deep, meaningful, rich conversation that allowed our relationship to evolve. She became one of my best buddies working at the Maples after that. And that was a courageous conversation. We're going to talk a lot about what that actually is and what it means and why we don't. Why we resort to defense and strategy instead. What does it mean to have a courageous conversation? How come we don't have them?
So we're going to put a little bit of theoretical context over this for you before we get more into the nuts and bolts about what this means to have a legitimate, courageous conversation. So we're starting with a little psycho-ed here. For all of us, we are hiding a particular level of vulnerability. And we're hiding a vulnerability that has its origins very early in our lives. It's the emotions that are driving us as we move through our relationships and influence the decision making we make in terms of what we can or can't talk about, will or won't risk, all of these things. And so when we're young, the very first part of us to get wired up is this emotional self, because it facilitates the bond with our caregivers. We're wired for love and connection before we're wired for anything else. We are emotional beings. We are meant to be connected. Whenever anything happens, whether it's something very obviously traumatic, as when you're abused or yelled at, or some obvious thing like that, or whether it's a more subtle thing, as when some part of you isn't seen or heard or validated, when those things happen, it is literally terrifying to a child because it feels like my survival is at stake. If I don't have your love and approval to my caregivers, I'm going to die. Because that's the purpose of the bond on a biological level. I think there's another purpose to it too, on a human spiritual level. But on a biological level, that's the point. We don't yet have the capacity to think through these things. That part doesn't kick in until way later in life, where we can logically assess what happened and rationally figure it out. So we're wandering around as these emotional creatures, and when something happens, we make it mean something about ourselves. And I'm saying make it mean as if it's a thought. It's not, it's a feeling. So there I am, blissfully wandering through my life, and all of a sudden something happens with my dad. He gets mad. What have I done? Oh no, what's wrong with me? I don't have the capacity yet to understand my dad's had a bad day. There was a stressful thing that happened at work. Even if they sit down and tell me afterwards, I don't have the capacity to get that. So, To give a little bit more of personal context around this, I will tell you a personal story about myself. Those of you who know me know this story. And I will say that even though I tell it a lot, it's still a courageous conversation. Because it's my story, and it's a very personal one. So one of the things that I wrestle with as a young child is I never felt accepted by my little peer group. I grew up in a very small town with this exact same circle of girls all the way from kindergarten to high school. No difference, all the same girls. So I would kind of find my way in very briefly to this little circle, and then something would happen and I'd be out again. So I felt very insecure and already in the basement of my psyche, feeling like I'm not quite good enough. I have to prove myself. I'm not enough. Somehow I'm not lovable or likable. However, I did have, for a period of time as a young child, a best friend, what I would call my best friend. So one night, I was over at my best friend Leanne's house. Her name was Leanne, and we were having a sleepover. And her sister was gone, so we were sharing the bunk beds in her room. I was on the top bunk, and she was on the bottom bunk. And somewhere in the middle of the night, it's very, very dark and quiet in the house, I woke up, and one of her two older brothers was standing over the bed. I just remember seeing a shadow and hearing this breathing. Her brothers, at that time, I would have been about 8. The younger of the two would have been about 13. The older of the two would have been 15, 16, somewhere in that range. When we're frightened, our instinctive response is fight, flee, or freeze. Children most often freeze. So that is what I did. I was frightened, I laid very, very still and just pretended I was asleep. He then proceeded to sexually molest me, and the whole time I just pretended that I was asleep. Eventually he left, and I got a very brief glimpse of him as he was walking out the door. Got a look at his shirt, but not really a good glimpse. I do not remember going back to sleep. I don't remember anything else about that night, but I remember the next day walking home with my friend Leanne and saying what had happened. And she said, "Oh no, don't tell your parents. My brother will get into so much trouble." And then she asked me all these questions about which brother it was. I did not get a good look at which brother it was. I had no idea, but she needed to know. She kept asking. Eventually she asked, was he big or was he little? To me, he was big, so I said he was big. I then discover I did not tell my parents. In retrospect, I think partly that was because she was my only friend, and I was really frightened of losing my only friend. I then discovered she went home, she told her parents blew up at the oldest brother and kicked him out of the house. Next time I was over at her house, I was in the kitchen with her and her mom. The youngest brother came in, and he was wearing the same shirt that I had very briefly seen as he left the room. And he had a little smirk on his face. And I remember the absolute skin-crawling horror that I felt at that moment. For many years, that moment actually overrode the sexual abuse for me. That horror feeling of, oh, I am bad, bad, what have I done? These are very intense feelings. And all of us have these moments. I'm describing something that's obviously traumatic, but all of us have those moments where we're flooded with this feeling of shame, of wrongness and badness. And that becomes our basement in our psyche. There's a part of us that gets locked down and pulled out of life into this basement. So in the very moment that happens, we think to ourselves, okay, who I am is not good enough. What do I have to do to be okay again? What do I have to do to survive? What do I have to do to get the love back? And we try behavior A, doesn't work. Behavior B doesn't work. Behavior C, bingo. It works. So who I really am in my basement is not good enough. I'm going to lock that puppy down, and I will become this strategy that seems to work. So my strategy was, mistakes are obviously terrible, I just won't make them. Right? Who needs to make mistakes? I'll become perfect. I will be the best at everything. No mistakes in my life. I also...
You know what it's like to live with that?
Poor Duane. He'd like to tell you about
that. It spills over a little bit too in terms of an expectation on what the partner should be like.
It could. Aw, here, let's give him some sympathy. Does that feel better? And so and I'm just giving you this one little sliver of an example, but this happens over and over. We develop different strategies, what seems to work in our lives. And they're not bad, but they're disconnected from the emotional realm in which we live underneath. We become strategic up here and emotional underneath. And the other thing that I learned to do is, which I think many people who have experienced those kinds of obvious traumas also do, is you don't even touch on it. So you don't, because if you touch on it, you have to feel it. And so you kind of swerve and swing and avoid ever going there. You may be surprised, because I did my whole frickin' degree in psychology and spent years and years and years studying this stuff. It wasn't until way after that this finally occurred to me. I thought, you know, that thing that happened, maybe it affected me. To me, it was this big mystery, right? Yeah, that thing happened. I know it happened. I didn't actually forget it. I knew it happened, but completely disconnected from the feelings attached. Oh, maybe it affected me. And one of the ways that we have of avoiding that is we are constantly in our strategic self seeking something out there in the world to make up for what we fear we are. So our focus is out here. Our focus is out in our lives, in the people in our lives, in order to avoid what's actually happening in here.
And most of us will, when somebody says, "Who are you?" you'll probably figure out your identity or define yourself according to pretend, defend, or hide in terms of what who you actually think you are. And it isn't who you are. It's who you have to be in order for people not to experience who you actually fear you are. Who you really are is actually down there in that basement, but it's not what you think it is. It's something else. And what we like to say about this pretend, defend, and hide personality, the pretender is actually really active in still believing that what you think you need, you can actually get if only you contrive this great strategic mask in order to gain approval and acceptance. It has a little bit of hope, actually, much more than the defender, who is more thinking either I'm going to get what I want by bullying or by arguing or about being angry or cynical. It's also defending if you get too close, because don't want to find out what's in the basement, so you defend against that. And the hider is way back there, who's actually probably given up on most things, of even trying. But nonetheless, it's still a reaction to seeking or trying to position yourself as something outside yourself in order for you to feel okay about yourself. And sadly, no matter what strategies it comes up with, they all backfire. Whatever it succeeds in getting will never be felt, because it's the one in the basement that needs to get it. Plus, the posturing of pretend, defend, or hide will always, like if I'm a cynic, and I'm cynical about everything that goes on around me, guess how the world will respond to me in my cynicism? Or what does a cynic see in the world? What does a cynic see? Things to be cynical about, right? And then it feeds back to the world reacts in a certain way, and you will never get what you want that way, because the very thing, this defense system in pretend, defend, and hide, it will always come back the wrong way. You'll never get it. If I think I'm going to be safe in a relationship of being angry and being bullying, guess how she's going to be? She's going to start distancing, and I'll get even angrier, she'll get more distant, and just the very thing the strategic self promises you is the very last thing it will deliver.
So for example, if I've got my little Miss Perfect thing going on, and at the end of this lecture, everybody stands up but that one person in the back corner, what do you think I'm going to do with that? See, I'm really not good enough. That one person in the back corner didn't stand up. Let's say some miracle occurs and everybody in the whole world stands up and goes, yes, it was perfect, Catherine, you did it, go. In my head, there's going to be, oh, if you really knew me, you wouldn't be saying that. Because we know we're hiding. We know. At some level.
So, that's such an important realization or revelation. If we spend our whole life actually believing that our strategic self is going to deliver the goods, get used to the life of Groundhog Day. Because that's what it is. So, anxiety is what is driving all of this all of the time. It's the fuel that's driving our dysfunctional relationship dynamics, our anxiety about someone getting too close to the basement or finding out who we are. It just activates instantly this hide, pretend, defend personality. And this is how we end up creating our reality, from operating from this posture or position. Our behaviors invite a certain response from those around us, and life organizes itself around whatever we put into it. This is our network of our life. Those lines of communication and connection with others, the quality of those relationships depend not so much on what you get from it, so much as what you're now putting into it. I'll give you an example of how the world will organize itself around what you put into it. This is kind of an extreme example, but it just completely stunned me when it happened. Years ago, I think way back in 1996 or 97, I was about to teach. Catherine wasn't working with me yet. I was teaching a workshop just near Bellingham in this retreat center. And it was an awakening workshop. And before the workshop even began, there was a guy. It was a guy named Frank. We'll give him the name Frank. Who just had a way of pissing off women. Before the workshop even began, all the women were just staying away from him, upset, talking about him, coming to me, complaining about him and what he was up to and what he was doing. People were threatening to leave. He just really, really had every woman in the place ready to kill. Wasn't whether they would kill him, it was again how. And I had to deal with this before the workshop even began. Right? Everybody's sitting around the circle and everybody's tense and like this and grabbing whatever weapons they had. They were just ready to go to war. And I had to deal with this. So I couldn't go through our normal, we have an incremental process of introducing people to the room and garnering trust and safety and educating them on our theory. I had to just completely leapfrog over the whole damn thing and address this thing. So I started talking to him, interviewing him in front of the group, and I said, I've noticed something going on here, and I think we have to deal with this, so tell me what's happening. And he started complaining and moaning about the women and this and that, and how unfair they are, and they didn't consider him. Somebody bought somebody a drink, and they didn't bring him one, and he's all pissed off, and okay. And I keep interviewing him. I said, how long have you been in this kind of a spot with women? He says, my whole goddamn life. I said, tell me more about that. And he ended up telling me, and it started softening up a little bit because we started talking about something other than this room. And we started talking about his relationship at home. He was an identical twin, an absolute identical twin. But he was the younger identical twin. And the other one was 2 minutes older, but he was the older brother. Always had the favor of mom. Dad wasn't around. And he always felt like he was less than, not good enough, and his mother always favored him, was always unfair, and every relationship he's been with ever since, it's been like that. And I said, so that must be really, really tough for you. And he went on to talk about what that was like growing up in a household where he's exactly the same, but he wasn't. He just felt like he was inferior. And tears started coming down his face, right? And I noticed all the women kind of leaning forward, like, and I kept interviewing him, talking about what he had been through, because he had never really talked about this before, and he started crying. And I had him right in the middle of the room, like everybody's in a circle. I had him right in the middle, and I came down beside him, and he was on the floor with his head down, and he was crying. And I looked up, and the women are just like, really, wow, what's happening here? And I said, where do you want to sit right now? To the women. And they said, well, I want to come close to him, right? So they put down their guns, and all found their way. Like, this is the first half an hour of a workshop. They're all around him.
Which is not necessarily going to happen.
No,
if we decide to take our workshop. It won't happen quite like that.
Unless he's there again. So they're all around him. His head is down like this. He's crying. And I think to myself, like, we as therapists, we just revel in these beautiful moments where somebody can take a new picture of what it means to be connected to other people. Because the one we carry around is so habitually, historically black and white and rigid, and this is rich. This could be one of those moments where somebody's life actually changes. I said, look up, because they're all around him. I said, look up. And he kept his head down and he said, no. What do you mean? Why don't you want to look? They're only here because you made them come here. They've just been conned and manipulated. It's all bullshit. I noticed the women bolt back, and I said, where do you want to sit now? And they all went back to their seats and grabbed their guns. He looks up and he says, see? Guess how the women were for the balance of that workshop? Right? The world reorganizes itself around what he put into it in that situation. We do that all day long.
And so those moments of difficulty that we run into, the moments of the courageous conversation, the moments where we're triggered, meaning somebody comes knocking on the door to your basement, right? And the impulsive reaction that wants to come out of you, whatever that might be, those moments are opportunities to evolve, not just for self, but in terms of the whole system itself. Because between that triggering event and your automatic instinctive reaction, which sometimes it's defensive, so between that and our reaction, there's a space. It does not feel like it because that whatever is your instinctive defended behavior wants to come out of you so quick. And as I said, they're not always negative. Mine would be make everything okay, perfect, perform. Doesn't look bad, but it's equally inauthentic. Between that and our reaction, there's a space. So hard to let ourselves have that space, but so important. Because in that space, we can actually go down to the basement and see what the heck is going on down there. What is happening that is triggering this behavior that's just going to get me the very things that I've always gotten. Period, guaranteed. So
I'm going to give you the next few slides so you can just burn through them real quick.
Thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate that.
I'll see if I can do this.
Yeah, well, I'll see too. We'll see how you do it.
Especially when the next slide is about containment.
Yes.
I'll do that.
So in that, we're now going to talk about what the skills are. Then you should behave that appropriately. Behave like the little man in the jar right now. contained. This means that rather than doing your instinctive thing, you're not going to do it. Instead, you're going to let yourself feel your feelings. We don't do that very well or easily. We are allergic to being emotionally uncomfortable in our culture. And that's understandable. We actually, because we start to feel the fear, we think something bad's happening. It's not. You're just feeling uncomfortable. Nobody, I swear to you, has ever died from emotional discomfort. And the reality is that until we allow ourselves to feel even the uncomfortable feelings, unless we allow ourselves to feel those, we will not feel the wonderful feelings we want to feel either, because they all use the same network. So our first skill is to actually contain our reaction and let ourselves feel whatever the anxiety is, whatever the fear is, instead of trying to fix that. So this is another way of saying we need to become emotionally aware of ourselves. Too often, people are either kind of flooded with feeling to the extent that they just automatically behave out of it, or, as in my case, cut off from it. They don't have the words to attach to what's actually happening in their bodies. And so the idea, in terms of a practice of containment, is to learn how to let yourself feel and label and give words to those feelings eventually, so that you can hold on to yourself as you're having an experience instead of lose yourself or have to cut yourself off from that experience.
So this space in between, we kind of summarize it down to it's really important to learn how to reflect rather than just reload. We can spend an entire lifetime instantly reloading. The moment we feel anxiety, we just reload our strategy and away we go. And again, it's like Groundhog Day, over and over and over again, because there's something, this gap in between is beckoning, it's calling on you to stop and reflect and ask yourself those questions. What do I fear is happening right now? Therefore, what do I fear this means about me? Just like when in my life? So there I am at the Maples with this woman, what do I fear is happening? I am a complete idiot. I have completely blown it. I am guilty, just like all men are, and I've got to make up for it now. Quickly, there's not even a second of any other consideration other than what I did that in the end. We'll talk more about that soon. So it's really important to get the discoveries that are waiting for us if we just gave it. Sometimes we think it takes 15 minutes to change the course of your life forever. 15 minutes of authentically reflecting in the company of another. Not just while you're reading a book or listening to a lecture. When you're in the company of another, to reflect and communicate and talk about that.
Which is our next point. Out here we're coming to the courageous conversation part of tonight. Out of that reflection, out of that containment and that reflection, is going to emerge some kind of vulnerable, responsible communication. And vulnerable communication is literally the art of telling the truth in an emotionally responsible way, meaning no blame, no pointed fingers, in a way that actually is open and inviting somebody to come close to you as opposed to pushing somebody away. And there are three little parts to this that it's important to encompass when we're talking about what vulnerable communication actually is. The first one is we have to start by stating some kind of positive relationship intention.
Which already requires a tremendous amount of courage. Because usually when there's a conflict, the first thing you want to do is withdraw your caring or your love for that person and hold it hostage, and if the other one just apologizes or corrects themselves, maybe you'll give it back then. We kind of go, let's talk. Right? We're going to withdraw an intention because it's vulnerable. To be able to say, listen, if we're having a difficulty, to say to Catherine, this relationship is really important to me, and you're important to me, and I want to work this out. That's why I want to talk right now. That's
so you
very vulnerable.
Your love into the mix. Or, it's, if not love, you put some kind of positive relationship intention in that first. Otherwise, why should anybody listen to you? Right? Somebody just comes up to you and says, listen, I got a problem I need to talk to you about. Something's going on here. Why should anybody listen? If you start, however, by expressing your caring, there's a reason to listen. Point number 2, be accountable. Which first and foremost means that you enter any tricky conversation being willing to be wrong.
Doesn't mean you are wrong, but you have to be willing to be. I always modeled myself as a therapist after Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek, when he had to deal with Ferengis and when they're ready to kill each other, and he thinks he understands it, but he hears their argument and this argument, and he's got his idea, but he went into each situation, willing to not be the oracle of truth, willing to be wrong about what he thought. And he'd always go in that way, like curious. Maybe I don't know everything, and because we actually don't.
And use I statements. So often I hear people weing, particularly couples. Well, we this, we that. We're in this dynamic where we use I statements. Being accountable means owning your own experience and speaking from that experience first and foremost, as opposed to talking about somebody else indirectly by weing. Finally, being transparent, which means if you've got something going on in your basement, talk about it. Tell the truth, as opposed to hiding that. Obviously, to be fully transparent is not necessarily appropriate in every single relationship you have in your life, but we believe that it is appropriate way more often than not. That kind of vulnerability invites connection. If you think about the times when somebody's really risked letting you know who they are from that vulnerable place, how do you feel about them? Do you feel closer? That's the answer to the question.
Is there actually anything more attractive than somebody is that willing to be that tender and real and accountable about themselves and curious about their own process to become a better person in this situation with you? Is there anything more attractive? There's nothing more attractive than meeting people like that. And we surrounded ourselves with people like that. All our staff are like that. Right, staff? Right.
And vulnerability is a risk, right? You're not necessarily going to go out on your first date and just blur your whole life story out to this person.
Second date.
It is a risk. And so when we're talking about how do we actually practice this in practicality, you take one vulnerable step, you see if you're met. If you are, you take another, and so on. And then trust is developed. So given that it's not necessarily always appropriate to be completely transparent with every single human in your life, we will say it is always appropriate to be honest about the wisdom of your struggle. So you might not emotionally be coming from the feeling as you're talking about yourself, but you can still share yourself. Right? You might not be emotionally leaning in every conversation, but you can still share yourself.
Even in the workplace, if you were a supervisor or a boss and something happened and you made a mistake, and there was conflict and difficulty, and you started having a conversation about this, and you walk through these, it's really important for me that we have a good working relationship. I really want to have that. And I'm really sorry the way I overreacted there. That wasn't really fair. And you know what? This is something I've been working on a long time, and I'm doing well with it. And I'm going to continue working well with this. It doesn't mean you have to now enter a therapeutic relationship with somebody around you to take care of you, but you can offer your wisdom about where you're going and what you're doing with it. You're informing them. And I think it actually is incumbent upon us to be that responsible. That doesn't mean we have to be emotionally vulnerable in terms of crying and sobbing or connecting and hugging and all that kind of stuff.
But there are places to do that
There's no question there's places to do that. I'd love to see that in the U.S. Congress right now. Imagine if they started confessing what's going on in their basements, my gosh, instead of just pointing their guns at each other. I'm serious. I mean, it's funny, but it's so tragic. You know, Donald Trump was severely abused as a kid. Like, for him to get attention from his father, he had to be a killer. His father would take him around to apartments to collect rent and show him how to bully people. And then he had him participating with him. And he got congratulated for being a complete asshole. And that's what's underneath all that craziness. We'll never get to it. But if he came to my office, that's what I would be looking for to begin to have that conversation. Maybe.
Wayne really wants him to come to his office. really
to
wants to have that opportunity. So it's really important because people.
Can somebody text him and just put that up before I change my mind?
Tweet it out. Tweet it out.
Yeah.
So it's important to differentiate victim from vulnerable, because often when we see somebody crying and it's not attractive, that's actually victim as opposed to vulnerable. When we see someone crying and we feel like we want to lean in, that's vulnerable. And the trick with differentiating is a victim statement will always be pointing its finger out at another human.
Look what you're doing.
Even though it might look very vulnerable, it's still going, poof,
those
pointing
tears
its
are bullets.
finger. So for example, I was really sad this week. You didn't seem to want to connect with me. How would you feel on that end, receiving that? Run the other way?
Yeah, because the gist of the communication is about the other. There's reference to self, but really it's about the other. Look what you have done. You have caused my sadness.
As opposed to, you're really important to me and I miss you. I don't know how to reach out and connect when you're busy and I feel really sad about that. Would that be easy to hear? Way easier, right? Because nobody's making a demand on you. You're just sharing yourself. You're not giving anybody any kind of quiet command about how they should be different. I'm really hurt that you're canceling our date night. I feel like I really don't matter to you. Again, push away. As opposed to, I have a fear or suspicion about myself that I don't matter, that I can easily fall into in situations like this. It isn't your job to take care of that, because guess what? It isn't. Nobody owes you anything. I value our time together. You're important to me, and I will miss you.
And here's for me, the real beauty, the real discernment between the two is on the left-hand side in the victim's statement. There's a beginning, middle, end story that's locked and tied. That's it. There's only one explanation for the hurt, and you have caused it. That's it. Right? That is the explanation. That's what we do to each other in relationships. We get triggered, something happens, and this person is the one that caused it. That's not true. When we start having vulnerable statements, it can invite an inspection of the history of that hurt. Maybe I've had this hurt before I met you. Maybe we together, maybe I can start researching that, and you can be my witness in this relationship about what's that really all about, instead of just having the battleground be in the relationship. You have no idea the change that can happen in a relationship when two people start thinking that way.
This is an example of a work-type statement. Sometimes I think if anything's going to get done, I'm going to have to do it myself. I'm feeling really overloaded here. Sometimes if you're what's called an overfunctioner, which would be a statement like that, would come out of your mouth. Sometimes it doesn't come out of your mouth. It's just quietly communicated without the words. But the message is still conveyed. As opposed to, I want to have a good working relationship with you. Sometimes I can be a real control freak, and I work myself into overload because I fear my value lies entirely in what I produce. I want to learn how to let go and share the load more reasonably because I know you're capable. And once in an audience, somebody said, but what if you don't know they're capable? An overfunctioner said that. I said, and just don't say that part. I just really want to learn how to let go and share the load more responsibly, period. So there is our little formula for what it takes to have a courageous conversation. And the point of this is that the kind of connection that can emerge out of those vulnerable conversations, that feeling of connection is the correction for what we make up about ourselves in the basement. If you found your way to a lecture like this, chances are you know, at least intellectually, that this crazy stuff that's rumbling around in your basement is not true. What you know here is not the problem, it's what you feel. And when you're brave enough to let somebody really see you and really know you on a full emotional level, and you look into that person's eyes, and not only have they not run from the room screaming, they actually are leaning in, and you can see compassion. When you have that feeling of connection, that is what corrects what you are believing about yourself that you made up in the basement. It pulls us out of the basement and back into life, literally. And life then organizes itself around that. That kind of courageous, vulnerable conversation is necessary for all of our relationships to adjust and move and grow. And it invites not only your own growth, but the growth of all of those around you. There is now nobody in my life that doesn't know who I am. Mm-hmm. And that was such a freeing, amazing feeling. There is nothing to hide. Everybody who's important to me actually knows me. There's nothing to hide anywhere.
And we have a saying in this that because we don't know what the rest of the world is going to do when we do that. And we say over and over again, don't measure your success by what you get in the end. Measure your success more about who you're becoming.
And one more final little story. I don't know why it never occurred to me to look for my friend Leanne, but I finally decided after the book was published, hey, I should see if she's on Facebook. Took me 5 minutes, I find her on Facebook. It was really amazing. And then I'm finding her on Facebook and she's going on my Facebook and I'm realizing, oh, like my book is plastered all over the Facebook.
Her name isn't mentioned like she did here tonight, but she knew that person would know who you were talking about.
She would, I mean, that story, I made no attempt to try and disguise any of the facts around it just because I thought, like, what? Nobody's going to pick that up and see themselves, but she would. So then I'm thinking, okay. So I send her the story right out of the book. And it was actually one of the most beautiful corrective experiences of my life, because what came back to me was, first of all, can't remember what she said, but something like, oh, Kathy, my beautiful friend.
It's like she was waiting for this conversation.
And I felt like I wasn't important, and what I learned in that conversation was how profoundly important I actually was to her, and what a huge impact I had in her life as a friend. And she told me that what happened with her brother, she said in a way it wouldn't have mattered which one you identified because they both did it to me. And the one that did do it to me was currently up on charges in our hometown for assaulting a child. And so that conversation I had with her inspired her to then go talk to her daughter, who she'd had a life of addictions, but now was in recovery. Her daughter didn't know her story. She talked to her daughter, and her daughter was so touched and impressed with her mom's story. And that's the point of having these conversations.
Because, folks, none of us know what is on the other side of that anxiety until you go there. We fear we know what it is. We think we know what's going to happen, and therefore we make decisions just to let our anxiety deal with us rather than us dealing with our anxiety. We're not here for a long time. You're not here just to figure out new and better ways to bounce off your anxiety and go through Groundhog Day. ad infinitum. The task is to drum up the courage to step into these territories we're talking about. To step in, to stay in, long enough to look around about what is this other world that you actually don't know about anymore because you cut off from it. You've been living most of us have been living a strategic life. And it could still be a good life, but it doesn't mean that's all there is to your life. There's so much more of you. Had he looked up, if he stepped into that and looked around, stayed in and looked around long enough to gather some new information, it only comes from having a courageous connection conversation with another where we feel vulnerable and we're awake and we're, what's happening here? And there's new possibilities. It ain't going to happen just being comfortable in our strategic self. And it's tragic. It's so tragic. Because nothing is going to happen up there other than what's already happening up there. It doesn't work. This kind of works. Not kind of, it's profound. Give yourself that opportunity. It's the lovely thing about the Awakening Workshop. You're there for a weekend, not an hour, with a group of other people, and collectively kind of stepping in. And you all get a glimpse of the human condition that is like blinding, that you can't forget. It'll change the way you see people forever. You didn't know that people aren't just these two-dimensional things to be frightened of all day long. They're three-dimensional people going through the same thing that you are. Wondering how to figure out, how to manage this stuff going on down there. It changes you. You see yourself and others in the quality of your relationships. So come out. Give this to yourself. Okay, we're going to pass it over to Naz to close.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
your
so much.
time.